Hayom Harat Olam. Today is the world's birthday. Over and over, we repeat this sentiment in our Rosh Hashanah Musaf service. Hayom Harat Olam. Happy birthday, world. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs teaches that just as the seventh day, Shabbat, is Zecher L'Maaseh Reshit, a memorial of the creation of the world, so is the seventh month, Tishrei. The Mishnah says that on Rosh Hashanah, all who have come into this world pass before God like sheep, an image which is powerfully echoed in the Unatana Tokef prayer. All of humanity is judged. Rosh Hashanah is our most universalist holiday. God is sovereign over the whole world. We reflect on what it means to be human using a Jewish lens. The entire Torah can be viewed as a collection of teachings and stories for a wandering people, a diverse collection of tribes about to enter the land that they will call home, where they will settle and build societal structures for generations to come. The Torah discusses what are their responsibilities and obligations to themselves, to each other, to the land that they are about to enter. Within the Torah's laws and stories, a pattern develops around the cycle of 7, beginning with the 7 days of creation. Today, while the weekly 7-day cycle of Shabbat is widely celebrated, and we celebrate with joy the festivals of the 7th month, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Simchat Torah, the yearly cycle of 7 is less known. This Rosh Hashanah, we are entering a Shemitah year. In biblical Israel, every 7th year was a Shemitah, which literally means release, when the land was not actively farmed and all debts were canceled. In the Yovel, or 50th year, after 7 Shemitah cycles, 7 cycles of 7, the land was redistributed and slaves were required to go free. This system of rest and renewal fulfills on a grand scale, on a grand social scale, the ideal of Shabbat, when we rest, accept the world as it is, and let go of what we can't control. Shemitah shows the ways the Torah envisions our responsibilities and mutual obligations. Rabbi Nina Beth Cardin wrote, "Let's face it, Shemitah has a marketing problem. It comes only once every 7 years. It has little name recognition. In fact, its name sounds like shmata, which means rag. So how do we capture the power of the 7th year? As a start, we have to embed it in a story. Perhaps that is one of our first jobs this coming Shemitah year, figure out how to articulate, frame, and fashion Shemitah's irresistible, inspiring, integrated story. This year, 5782, the year of Shemitah, let us respond to Rabbi Cardin's challenge by exploring how Shemitah may be an inspiring force in our lives. Let's explore how we might listen to the lessons of mutual responsibility that Shemitah is teaching. Let's begin to tell the story of Shemitah. We'll start at the beginning. Nigel Savage, the founding director of Hazon, the Jewish Lab for Sustainability, wrote, "Shemitah is central to understanding the nature of Jewishness itself. It's clear when you read the primary texts that the Torah understands Shemitah to be quite literally no less significant than Shabbat. How does our Torah describe Shemitah? The first mention of Shemitah in the Torah is in Exodus chapter 23, at Sinai, in the middle of Parashat Mishpatim's ethical code. 6 years you shall sow your land and gather its yield, but in the 7th you shall let it rest and lie fallow. Let the needy among your people eat of it, and what they leave let the wild beasts eat. You shall do the same with your vineyards and your olive groves." According to this text, the main intention and purpose of Shemitah is to support the needy, the marginalized of society. When we get to the law in Vayikra, it is framed a little bit differently. When you enter the land that I assign you, the land shall observe a Shabbat of the Lord. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year the land shall have a Shabbat of complete rest, a Shabbat Shabbaton, a Shabbat of the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap, but you may eat whatever the land during its Shabbat will produce. Here in Leviticus, the primary beneficiary of the Shemitah year is the land itself. The land is observing a Shabbat, a sacred time, a time to cease actively creating, a time simply to be. In the book of Deuteronomy, the law takes on yet another level of meaning, as it includes debt remission into the practices of the 7th year, tying economic justice into the agricultural context through which Exodus and Leviticus view the law. Every 7th year you shall practice remission of debts. This shall be the nature of the remission. Every creditor shall remit the due he claims from his fellow. Do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kinsman. Rather, you must open your hand and lend him sufficient for what he needs. Beware, lest you harbor the base thought. The 7th year, the year of remission, is approaching, so that you are mean to your needy kinsman and give him nothing. He will cry out to the Lord against you. Give to him readily and have no regrets when you do so, for in return the Lord your God will bless you. For there will never cease to be needy ones in your land, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor and needy kinsmen in your land. Deuteronomy is clear that debt remission is an ideal, part of the process of release, but also that it is really hard. There is a deep concern that people will see debt remission as a reason not to lend to people in the first place. The tension here is powerful and meaningful to us today. As Jewish tradition developed through exiles and returns and over the centuries, Shemitah as a law was practiced only within the designated land of Israel. According to the Talmud, when the borders of Israel were being redefined upon return from the first exile period, certain cities were intentionally left out of the land of Israel so that the Shemitah laws would have no effect there. In these locations, farming practices would continue without interruption during the Shemitah year. So from the very beginning, Shemitah is tied up with the land of Israel and in what it means to be a people living in a diaspora, not on our land. It shows a clear vision of mutual obligations and responsibilities, and its history also shows the tensions between how we would like to live up to those obligations and how we actually do behave. Today, Shemitah provides lessons in those responsibilities and obligations. Let's consider 3 ways that Shemitah can challenge and be meaningful for us, even though we do not live in the land of Israel, and even though most of us are not farmers. The first connection to Shemitah is the way it challenges us to think about our obligations to ourselves and to God. Like Shabbat, Shemitah challenges us to rest and see what can grow when we stop pushing so hard. Shemitah is a leap of faith, ultimately, that we will not die from stopping, that letting ourselves lie fallow can be liberating and creative and powerful. As Rabbi David Ingber taught, something miraculous happens when we stop. We get to experience the power that nature knows called dormancy. Dormancy, that which is holding, the heartbeat that rests, the hibernating animals, all of winter, waiting and waiting. There are seeds inside each and every one of us, inside this culture, that cannot emerge because we do not know that dormancy does not mean death. Resting does not mean disappearing. What keeps us from stopping is that we are terrified of resting. We fear that when we stop, even for a moment, the sheer enormity of our lives will overwhelm us. can we let go of the obsession of finishing what can't be finished? Many of us who are not farmers think of fallow as the land lying bare soil, without crops or other plants growing in it. In fact, that is not healthy for the soil, and that is not what the Torah envisions. The Torah is clear. The land should not be planted by Jews observing the law, but perennial plants and other naturally seeding plants will grow. What might we learn when we turn away from a grow, produce, work engine about what naturally grows in ourselves and in our communities? What seeds are already planted in us and just need time and space to grow? Rabbi Jeremy Benstein wrote, "Currently, only academics have a sabbatical year." Why? Our affluent society actually decreases leisure and family time, as more people not only choose to work to fulfill what they want to be, but feel compelled to work in order to afford what society says they should have. Consumerism necessitates producerism to keep both supply and demand high. Yet, as Shemitah hints, people are indeed like the land. We too have obligations in our relationship with ourselves. Sabbatical is an incredibly important part of living. Here are some ways that we can make conscious changes in the coming year to make the spiritual teachings of Shemitah a living reality in practice. Take the time to form a new relationship with work and rest. Allow your land, your body, your workers, your production and consumption to rest. How often do you experience a personal fallow period? Take time off and make sure that you are giving time off to those who work for you. Remember that we do not ultimately own our land, resources, or even our time, and that these are divine gifts. Commit to using the space and time created by letting go of some of the more commercially driven parts of your life to take on a new hobby or volunteer activity, to create art, to connect to the divine, to find ways to recharge and nurture the seeds already planted within. Shemitah also provides lessons about our obligations to each other. As my colleague Rabbi Louis Paulison wrote, Shemitah reminds us that everything we consume is a gift from the earth. This year I read, at the recommendation of my sibling, Gabriella, the book Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by scientist, author, poet, and member of the Native American Potawatomi Nation, Robin Wall Kimmerer. And it profoundly changed how I think about and relate to the world. As Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer writes, gifts from the earth or from each other establish a particular relationship, an obligation of sorts to give, to receive, and to reciprocate. Those who regularly garden or farm might better understand that tending to plants opens an ongoing relationship between human and plant. Each fruit or vegetable is a gift that comes not only from our efforts, but from the success of a healthy, complex ecosystem. My basil plants grew better after I started harvesting from them. Dr. Wall Kimmerer teaches us that from the viewpoint of a private property economy, a gift is deemed to be free because we obtain it free of charge, at no cost. But in a gift economy, gifts are not free. The essence of the gift is that it creates a set of relationships. The currency of a gift economy is at its root reciprocity. The Jewish approach to gifts and the earth is similar to this indigenous Native American approach. Traditional Jewish culture speaks the language of mutual obligations. A big part of the intention of the Shemitah year, especially as it is described in Exodus and Deuteronomy, is to benefit the poor, the indebted, the economically disadvantaged members of our society. It is not accidental that debt forgiveness is part of the equation. This is key to how the Torah wanted to create the possibility for a reset. The Torah teaches that there should be some time, perhaps once every 7 years, where wealth doesn't matter, where everyone is seen as equal. Here are some ways that we can make conscious changes in the coming year to make the socio-economic teachings of Shemitah a living reality in our practice. We can commit to generous giving and lending practices, such as supporting free loan organizations like the Hebrew Free Loan Society or the Community Loan Fund of the Capital Region, seeing the value of exchange without the need for profit or monetary gain, understanding that in reciprocal relationship, all flourishing is mutual. We can commit to a practice of debt release in our personal lives. Did you lend money to a friend or family member and that never got paid back? Are you still holding on to some resentment about that? What would it be like to really feel in our hearts that we have released all debts from previous years? We can choose to purchase only what we need each month, trying to live into the value of a fair distribution of resources by giving more than our usual charitable donations and tzedakah gifts. Finally, Shemitah teaches us to think differently about our obligations to the entire world. It challenges us on our relationship to the environment, to the land that we live on. In the opening of her book, Dr. Wall Kimmerer tells a story that demonstrates how our society struggles to even imagine being in right relationship with the more than human world. She writes, "On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 9:35 a.m., I am usually in a lecture hall at the university, expanding about botany and ecology, trying, in short, to explain to my students how global ecosystems function. One otherwise unremarkable morning, I gave the students in my general ecology class a survey. Among other things, they were asked to rate their understanding of the negative interactions between humans and the environment. Nearly every one of the 200 students said confidently that humans and nature are a bad mix. Later in the survey, they were asked to rate their knowledge of positive interactions between people and land. The median response was none. I was stunned," writes Dr. Wall Kimmerer. "How is it possible that in 20 years of education, they cannot think of any beneficial relationships between people and the environment? Perhaps the negative examples they see every day, abandoned, polluted brownfields, factory farms, suburban sprawl, truncated their ability to see some good between humans and the earth. As the land becomes impoverished, so too does the scope of their vision. When we talked about this after class, I realized that they could not even imagine what beneficial relations between their species and others might look like. How can we begin to move toward ecological and cultural sustainability if we cannot even imagine what the path feels like? So what does the path to sustainability feel like? Shemitah offers us a path toward ecological sustainability and right relationship with the earth. According to the discussion on Shemitah in the book of Leviticus, when the rights of the land conflict with the needs of people, the rights of the land take precedence. In the words of Rabbi David Seidenberg, justice can never be complete without justice for the land. Rabbi Jill Hammer taught, the land is a resource that belongs to God, not a resource that belongs to us. The land requires redemption, which means restoration to its state of fertility and connection to God. The land has to be fallow. It needs this period of rest, which is also a period of temporary wildness, in order to be whole. Wild spaces are a delight for God. We need them, and they may save our lives. Here are some ways that we can make conscious changes in the coming year to make the environmental teachings of Shemitah a lived reality in our practice. We can support indigenous groups in their relationships to the land. We can try to re-envision the ways humanity can have a positive relationship with the land, as Dr. Wall Kimmerer challenges us to do. We can commit to eating locally sourced foods grown in season. We can commit to waste reduction, to treating the harvest as something with a special sanctity that should not be thrown away. We can support organizations which focus on land stewardship, on conservation, and on decommercialization. As we commit to spending this Shemitah year, challenging ourselves to explore our relationship to ourselves, to each other, and to the world, and to God, and figuring out what responsibilities and obligations those relationships require of us. We must not forget that Shemitah also challenges us to examine our relationship to Israel. Shemitah has always been a legal framework based in that land, and thinking deeply about this law requires us to ask some fundamental questions. What does Israel mean to you? What are our responsibilities as Jews living in the diaspora to be connected to the land from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea? What are our responsibilities to the people who live there, both Jewish and non-Jewish? Here are some ways that we can answer Shemitah's call to re-examine and re-engage our relationship with Israel over the coming year. We can sponsor an olive tree in the north of Israel, literally connecting to the land and those who farm it, using the program My Tree in Israel that we launched in our community last week. We can participate in the Adult Education Committee's programmatic theme, Our Relationship with Israel, which will include Dr. Burke's lecture series, a Shabbaton with JTS Chancellor Emeritus Dr. Arnie Eisen, and programs with perspectives ranging from historical to spiritual, using text, dialogue, movies, music, prayer, and more. We can sign up for the upcoming congregational trip to Israel, which was originally planned for this past June, but which has been postponed. Hayom Harat Olam. Today is the world's birthday. Today is the day we recommit to our obligations in relationship to ourselves, to each other and society, to the land and natural resources we benefit from, and to the land of Israel. This Shemitah year, let us challenge ourselves to explore those obligations and responsibilities in relationship more deeply. What happens when we step away from our constant focus on growth and production? What seeds are already planted within ourselves? How can we rebuild our society so wealth matters far, far less, and we see ourselves in mutual relationship with everyone? How can we build a society where everyone benefits from the fruits of all our labor? And how can we pursue a vision of justice that includes justice for the land? These are the challenges that Shemitah asks us to consider. This year, let us explore them together as a congregational community and grow in our relationships and mutual obligations. Shana Tova.